institutional framework and the stakeholder coordination. We're going to have a mix again of shorter presentations this time of external speakers, as well as examples and some minor part of theory. And then tomorrow next week it's going to be on implementation programs and action plans, monitoring and evaluation, which came back a couple of times as being an important issue. And then after we will have the session on the regulation. So as said, there's going to be a small interactive tour de table with, not tour de table, a small interactive Miro exercise, which fits in a bit of theory. Then we're going to have a recorded session by Søren Hermansen, who is from Samso Energy Academy. We know the case really well, but he couldn't be there, so we recorded it. If there are any questions, we should be able to answer them. If not, we can always go back to Søren and get the answer for next week. Then we'll talk with Camille on some stakeholder coordination, so good practices from small French islands. And then I will be engaging you into a number of bottom-up initiatives from throughout Europe. It's a topic that is close to my heart, stakeholder engagement, so don't hesitate to interrupt me and ask additional examples where needed. So there we go. And then I'm going to take you to a little bit of theory. Now I have to go back here, stop share, and get you another presentation. And then it's a bit less convenient today, as I'm giving you the presentation from a Bruges hotel room. So I have to adapt a little bit to the circumstances, but we'll get there. There we go. Voila. So the topic of today is the institutional framework and the stakeholder coordination. Now, the first question is, of course, what is an institutional framework? And then we're going to dive into stakeholders, which is going to be an important aspect of today. So the institutional framework actually is the whole combination of laws, regulations, procedures, stakeholders with their roles and their norms. Stakeholders have their own values and norms that they come with. And altogether, they shape the socioeconomic activity and the behavior. Of course, we're talking about energy, so they shape where we're going with the energy consumption, related emissions, and the energy transition. It links, of course, to a lot of other topics on policy. Energy links to poverty as well, but also to economic development. And to frame a bit where it fits in what we've already done in the last couple of days, yesterday we saw the policy cycles. So policy formulation, and where Eric is in. Eric, I'm going to use you 100 times because I really love the fact that you're exactly in that decision-making stage. So the policy formulation and the policy decision-making is the system of laws and regulations. So that's a bit what we did on Tuesday and yesterday. And then on Tuesday, we also used that example of the problem tree, the objective tree, to then come to the actions related to that. That links a bit more to the fourth and the fifth part of the cycle, which is how do you really set the procedures, which are the rules, how do you concretely do it on the ground, and which potential new institutions or new roles of existing bodies need to be put in place. So coming back to what we did on Tuesday, this was the example where we turned the problems into opportunities, into objectives. And that is when we said, okay, the result could be that there is less volume of wastewater directly discharged in the river, which would lead to better quality of the river water. And the overall objective of that would be that, you know, there is improved health, less illness under kids of 5, and there is a better ecosystem in the river. And so the assumptions linked to that are really these rules and procedures that you're going to evaluate afterwards, where we said, okay, the river flow is maintained above X megaliters per second for at least blah, blah, blah. So these are the parts where you can really then afterwards measure and use data for. So that is the institutional framework. It's going to flow into the presentations throughout the session today as well. But then we're going to talk about stakeholders. And to discuss a bit the stakeholders, we're going to go back to our interactive Miro board. And I'm just going to get it shared. So I'm going to stop sharing this one. So I can provide you the link to the interactive Miro board, where we're going to mainly focus today on in a short exercise on who are exactly the stakeholders that you can think of. So I'm going to put it in the chat window. And so you're now used to it. Let me find the chat window. More chat window. Voilà. There you go. Voila. I will share it as well. I'm just going to put it on the other screen. Voila. And then we'll guide you through the exercise. So what we want you to do is think in who, voila, there are already people in the room, so that's good. We're going to go to the blue part below there, which is, I just hope this is going to work. Oops, no, this is not going to work. Okay, let me move it here. I'm sorry, but I'm going to take you back to another screen, which is going to make my life easier. Voila, there we go. So we're going to look here at the stakeholders. So now think about the actions you would like to take in order to get your policy implemented, evaluated as well, designed, but also to get acceptance. So every stage that you think of, definitely what we already put there is the local community. They have to agree. Your country or territorial authority needs to be there. A distribution service provider. I think, Janet, you said I'm a utility, yeah? Shall we add utility because you're key in the energy transition as well, huh?
Yes, and I suppose in St. Helena's case, even more so because we're completely state-owned. So we do have that relationship with St. Helena government as the ultimate decision maker on this.
Yeah, okay, so a utility. Do you think of others when you want to implement an energy transition project? Do you think of others that you might need? What about the businesses that are your clients?
Absolutely, because it informs long-term planning and demand in the sector. I'd also say our planning authority has got to be key.
Yep, planning authority. If there are others that already think of certain stakeholders, go ahead. Yes, there you go. The independent producers. Yes, the planning authority. Then some others. Okay, that's a really important independent power producers. I'm thinking of Curaçao, Bonaire, these islands. I'm sorry, but I've been there a couple of times, so that's why it's easy for me. But when I was there, especially in Bonaire, Nathalie, the oil industry, or let's say the oil stockage and stuff like that on the island was in the hands of one of the big four families on the island. Would that be a stakeholder that you need to engage when you develop a new policy?
I'm from Curaçao.
Yeah.
But in Curaçao we do have a refinery, but it is a state-owned enterprise. So the industrial sector will be very important as a stakeholder. But you mentioned Bonaire, right?
Yeah.
Or is that oh no.
Yeah, I mentioned it because I've been trying to set up some projects to get some European transition there. And what they told me, it's really difficult for that transition because of the big importance of the, you know, the oil family, as they call it.
Oh, okay. Oil family or private owned.
Yeah, owned, let's say private owned fossil fuel producers.
I don't know. if that is the case in Bonaire, because in Bonaire,
Yeah,
I don't know. No, I don't know. Only in Curacao, the refinery,
yeah.
which is a very big one, very important for the economy, is a state-owned
Okay,
enterprise.
let's just put the refinery there
Mm.
for a second. Okay, that was not what I meant. Okay, then so we have citizens, we have the environment, which is also super important indeed, planning authority, local regional authorities, and I somehow can't move this thing. So I don't know what is this. End users, indeed, distribution system provider, a regulator. There are certain islands that have a regulator, right? Oh, we have the regulator already. Thank you. Thinking about anyone else, I like the fact that someone put the environment there, economic department, indeed. The tourism sector, is that somehow, I mean, if you initiate a change which relates, for example, to emission or energy use, would the tourism sector be affected, like the cruises? Or are they more following your regulation, or do you engage them in the discussion?
Yes, I'm the one who, this is Eric. I'm the one who placed the tourism authority or tourism and hotel organization, because when we were discussing about offshore wind, the tourism authority said we don't want to see the windmill from the shore. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's why I included that. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
from St. Martin point of view, that is also an important stakeholder, I would say, particularly from our cruise industry.
Yeah.
So I support that as well.
Yeah, yeah. So that seems a highly relevant one. Then I'm just thinking, if you do the whole transition on the islands, which probably also implies you're transitioning to electric vehicles, but you're taking jobs away. So is there unions representing certain factory or certain employee groups? Let's say I used to work on fossil fuel cars, or I used to work in the thermal power plant, but if you're closing that, I lose my job. Is there an organization that represents these people?
For example, in Curacao, you do have unions representing the employees, but maybe the car dealers.
Yeah.
In Curacao, we do have a car dealers association
Okay.
representing the whole sector. So maybe from that point of view, we can also.
Yeah. For the bigger islands, which is more challenging on the smaller islands, would you take along any knowledge institute, like a local university or a local branch of another knowledge institute? If you do, I mean, think about how you do it today, yeah? Your transitioning projects. Eric, you did that transitioning where I hope yesterday it passed the second round. Did you develop it completely independent, or did you hire a consultant or a research institute? Eric? For the others, is it something you engage? Do you typically do it yourself, like the preparatory studies, potential feasibility studies, or is it something that you externalize?
From Curacao, we will hire consultants from abroad.
From abroad?
Yes.
Okay, and is it because...
But they will be working in close cooperation with the local, let's say the Ministry of Economic Development.
Yeah.
Also the Ministry of General Affairs, but also state-owned enterprises and other important stakeholders.
And is it because the knowledge, I mean, there's a university in Curacao, no?
Yes, we do have. Yes, we do have a national university on the island. It is a very good point in order to involve the university too.
Yeah, yeah. Then thinking about creating acceptance, who is typically, do you have an agency that creates acceptance? Is there like an energy agency or an energy guichet where they can go, or is it currently not something that is available?
Not really, not really. There are a lot of let's say private initiatives that do have yes, the interest in doing that, but it is not from the government.
So could we call them NGOs?
Yes.
Yeah. Oops, that was the capital on the wrong part. Okay, NGOs. Okay. So we have governmental parts, we have industry, the customers, university, indeed, refinery, unions, the utility, the regulator. Are we missing anyone? Nature and conservation we have, yeah.
Can I add something I think is good to know?
Yeah.
Because the point that Natalie mentioned about car dealers association, we have also the gas station owners, because if we're talking in terms of transitioning from gas, hybrid, fully electric, they are also included. So almost in all those sectors, we have unions or representatives. So I would propose to change car dealers stakeholders representatives. Let's say that way, because it's not only the car dealers, it's several.
Yeah, I think, yeah. So I'm just going to put them next to each other so we know that they belong to each other. And then I'm thinking also, I mean, people will have to install it. So think about whether it's a small or a large solar plant, it has to be installed and maintained. So they have an interest, of course, as well. Are they organized? Do you already have them? And if we don't have them, we might think about schools that need to train them, right?
At least in Curacao, we have told they're not associated together. They're separate companies that provide that kind of services.
Yeah.
And one particular thing about we have apprenticeship together with the schools, though not on that specific level.
Okay, so how would it typically work?
The installation, you mean, or the?
No, so if you want to train you will need a lot of people. So if you want to train them, how would you do that? Who would you engage to establish such a training?
Let me tell you from my point of view. I'm just talking one university in particular here on the island, to see if they can assist either a vocational school or whatever to start preparing people. But it's a little bit difficult because we are not, let's say, experienced in that kind of setting up of specific curriculum for those kind of necessities. But that's the only thing I can say from my point. I don't know if Natalie knows about more, but that's the one I know.
Currently, for example, in the energy sector, for example, the refinery, but also the electric and water company, they do have their own training center. But for the future, there are ideas and plans in order to introduce a training center specifically directed towards energy transition. That will be, let's say, in together with a TNO.
Yeah.
Yes, we are planning to introduce something like that.
Yeah. Now for the small islands, so do we have someone from the small islands that could explain how they see it? Is there, will there be an exchange with the bigger islands? How do the small islands typically look at it? I'm not seeing you. So the only one from a small island that I know is Eric. Eric, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so how would you train the people on your island?
I will tell the realistic story. We
Yeah.
received, as I mentioned the other day,
Yeah.
a grant from Resembil from EU, and we train two sets, one for the installers and one for the government, the inspectors. So
Yeah.
and we hired a trainer from the United States, the NABCEP and the Solar Energy International.
Yeah. Okay, and they come and train the people. And if there wouldn't be the budget from that European Resembit project, how would you, I mean, how would it even be feasible in the absence of such support?
The answer is yes, because the installer companies sponsor their own installers to have
Okay.
the NABCEP training. And
Yeah.
for the SEI, the Solar Energy International, I use myself. I enrolled myself. Even
Yeah.
I did not avail of the resume bid, but I enrolled myself from my money. And then later on, I requested to be reimbursed. And I'm lucky my boss said it's okay to be reimbursed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we have a bit of a stakeholders. I put the one in at the training body in red, because of course it's a crucial actor, but I think also it might need attention. Although Erik, you kind of give me the reassurance that even in the absence of money, it would be feasible to do so. So I'm going to take you back to the slides to see that we actually, I think, have all the sectors that we should have. So I need to stop sharing this one and then take you to the other screen. And then I'm going to introduce something that is called the quadruple helix probably, but we're going to get you to the quintuple helix. We said yesterday who needs to be involved, or I think we said it on Monday. Any individual, group, people, institution, or firm that may have a significant interest or somehow or being affected by the new measure. So if we look at the sectors that we need to introduce, and I have the benefit of looking now at a middle board as well, we mentioned academia. Of course, in your case, in many of the small islands, collaborating with research institutes is not self-evident. There's not so much opportunities. You do not have that on the islands. Curaçao is a bit an exception. So in that sense, it's not always self-evident to engage them. Industry, we mentioned that. Government, we mentioned that elaborately. With your
Sorry.
India, yeah.
Can I just as an observation?
Yeah.
The academians here on the island are doing research. So it is us, and let's say specific one, in my case, that we don't involve them as fast or as usual is supposed to be. But they're doing research, so we do not incorporate them in most of those projects. Why?
Yeah.
Actually, I can't respond to that, but I just wanted to mention that particularly.
Yeah, and why not? Because we do it more and more to make sure that they are developing something that can be used.
I think it's something cultural, most people go easily to outsourcing that to consultancy or other sectors instead of approaching the academia. And one reason I can imagine, therefore, is because most of our academians are abroad, either in Holland, United States, and so on. And the lack of trust, maybe. But I think it's a good point, and that's my point of view. Try to involve them as much as possible, because young people with out-of-the-box views.
Yes. Yes. And the benefit of doing that is also that they start thinking more in research that is relevant for the local society. If they see opportunities to be able to test stuff, we get a lot of questions also from to develop topics for master thesis students. So they have, a year to work on a topic, and okay, sometimes nothing comes out, but sometimes indeed they can come up with really creative solutions. And they also learn to think more in the challenges of the islands rather than learning from the books and keeping that view from the books. So it's definitely something you could try. And starting with master thesis is actually a very easy way to do that. But here you see more and more that collaboration, also because the European Commission pushes towards it, but it really leads to more applied research, and it also, super interesting, makes research more interdisciplinary. So you're more and more pushed to not only have the engineers, but also engage psychologists in how do you now sell your solution. I'm going to give a simple example. There's been a lot of research done on automation, home automation, so that you don't have to bother about when to turn on the car charging or the washing machine or whatever. And so engineers had been developing it, and it wasn't a solution that was accepted by end consumer. So they engaged sociologists and psychologists, and it turned out that what the engineers assumed that the people would like was a completely different level of interaction and automation with the control than what people liked. So now more and more, this interdisciplinary approach is promoted and is adopted as well. And that would be something that is super interesting to do with the research institutes, because they often look for these cases as well. And then you can engage the different departments, which is much more challenging when we would hire a consultancy, because interdisciplinary consultancy is unique. So definitely something that we would promote.
I must say,
yeah.
I just wanted to remark on one other thing. On the aspect of marine biology, we are top in researching, I must say, even though it's not applied to direct local service, but we have Carmabi, which each year I think produce in between 6 to 8 PhDs regarding marine biology. So I think we just have to adopt or copy their way of doing that kind and start implementing to our universities too.
Yeah, and honestly, we're coming in March. So if you want me to help with initiating that or giving some ideas on how we typically do it, just letting me know, because it really leads to it leads also to keeping the people there that are well educated, because they can see that they can really contribute. So that helps as well. Civil society, go ahead.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. More than welcome. I mean, I love the islands, so that's why we're in the project. But also, I mean, I work for the European Commission also to work on that interdisciplinarity, which is something they want to push more and more. So I can definitely help on that. So civil society, we had them. Civil society is, of course, not only the citizens, but it's the whole broader society. So we do have them. And then the environment, which on the islands is even more important than on the mainland in the continents. So we actually were fine. We're definitely forgetting people. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if I look back at it after our meeting today and after the same course with the French people, who we still need to add to it. Then I think, Sarah, if I'm not mistaken, we have our first external speaker, right? Sarah is my agenda keeper for today. And I just have, can you, wait, you're muted, Sarah, in case you want to say something. I'm just checking because I had too many things here.
I'm opening it right now and I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, so
enjoy it.
Yeah, Søren is from Samso Energy Academy. Samso Energy Academy started in 1997 with an energy transition program. They won a competition. So what the Danish government did was they suggested, they set out actually a competition, which came with money as well. And it was meant to really understand how an island could transition to 100% renewable. And you could see but I mean, they got a massive amount of funding for it. Søren is there, but he's not really live with us here. But so the focus was really on how do you make that energy transition. We're going to come back to it later to really show how a government, an authority can help enabling these projects. So Sarah, please go ahead. So all let us know if you can hear it. We can't hear Søren yet, Sarah. Yeah, we can't hear him. or
Okay.
yeah.
I hear him, but I'm gonna check the settings.
Is it not under your micro, probably?
Because I tested it this afternoon and it was working, but okay.
Let's give it a minute and see whether it works. If not, then we take the next speaker first. Volume, yeah, but that's the volume, so it shouldn't be that.
That's the volume. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it should be
Let me
your,
just try.
your micro. We can try, but I don't think that is gonna make it. No, can you check maybe on your microphone?
Yep.
And see whether you can use that one. If that changes anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, does it do anything? No, then I suggest, Sarah, that we first take the next speaker and then we try to make it work on our side. Would that be okay?
I think, if I may suggest,
Yeah.
yeah, when you, this is Zephyrus, when you are sharing the screen, you might see an option that says to use the computer audio. There may be a little box to check. When you share screen, it
Yeah.
says use computer audio. That will allow it to come through your computer, yes.
Okay, Sarah, can you unshare and then reshare again?
Okay.
Yeah, you could be right because it referred to a headset. Yeah.
Yeah, you should see a box, a window that says use computer audio. If you check that box, it will allow it to come through.
You see it, Sarah? If not, I might try to
No.
wait up. I'm just gonna
Switch to phone audio?
no, because
Test speaker and microphone or leave computer audio. That's audio settings.
wait,
Yeah.
Sarah, I'm gonna see whether I can do it. Screen 2,
Mhm.
pre-recording.
Yeah, when you're sharing your screen, there should be a box that says, give you the option to share your computer audio.
Wait, oh no.
Okay, so here we are. Thank you
Can you
so
hear
much
it?
for having
Yes.
the so-called
Yes.
energy
Okay, super.
stakeholder engagement mechanisms for this workshop. Next, please. So I'm Søren Hermansen. I'm the director of the Samsø Energy Academy, and we've been working with sustainable community development for the last 25 years, which is a long time. We won a competition to be the Danish energy island in 1997, and we pledged to give up fossil fuels and convert to 100% renewable energy by 2028, which is like a 10-year development plan. In this period, we learned a lot about how to engage the public and how to avoid conflicts and what do you call it, disagreements with population, municipality, government, and authorities in general. The plan was to make this 4,000 inhabitant community aware of the problem. What are we going to do in the future? How are we going to engage you? And what does it mean for your daily life? Thanks. So we invented a new word called commodities. Commodities equals commons plus communities. So a community always have some common ground or common energies, common ideas, which was very crucial in the old days before you had like a bureaucratic administration. You had a local city or village administration where you had to administer access to grass for cattle, access to water, to firewood, to kind of all kind of vital component of what a community needs. And this is generally called the commons. So if we construct these two words, commons, administrated by communities, it must be commodities. It doesn't exist yet in the English language, this word, but it's trying to kind of make a new word for how to describe what's going on here. Next. So in the plan, we indicated that we were going to change the entire energy seen from 3 or maybe 4 different areas. One was electricity, and the total consumption of the entire island shared by the 4,000 people, all inclusive, like for refrigerators, cooling, storage capacities, and all these other things, heat pumps, used about 23,000 megawatt hours, or 23 million kilowatt hours. And for this, we estimated we would need about 11 megawatt wind power to be able to produce the same amount of energy as we were consuming on a yearly basis. And after a couple of years, we had all these 11 turbines up and running, and they are now producing all the energy we need per year. So it's an average number. It's not per day, but it's an average number per year. Sometimes we produce more and sometimes we produce less. In this function, we also discussed that if we're going to have wind turbines, it's necessary to invite people to co-own the wind turbines because they're very visual in the landscape. People can see them from far away. And therefore, we had this agreement. If you could see them, you were also invited to co-own them. In a cooperative ownership model, we invited people to buy shares in the wind turbines, which kind of more or less eliminated the objections or the criticism of the wind turbines. Because if you are an owner, you also feel obliged to talk in a friendly way about the wind turbines because they mean something for you. They mean money in the pocket, but they also mean that you are a participant, an active partner in the process. For heating, we used to have oil burners in almost all houses. And for this, we needed to change from oil to green energy. And we have a lot of straw and biomass on the island, so we converted almost 75% of all houses to district heating. So today we have 4 district heating plants serving most of the houses in a more densely populated area with district heating from straw, wood chips, and solar thermal. And this also, and the remaining 25% is heating their houses with heat pumps or alternatives to that also. Very, very few have oil today. So the last one was transportation. In 1998, it was difficult to see that we could change transportation by kind of the proven technology of those days. In 1998, electric cars were not so common. So what we did was we erected 10 offshore wind turbines, each one 2.3 megawatt, and they were kind of producing the same amount of energy that we were using for transportation, all inclusive, which was like ferries and cars and tourism and everything was meant to be able to be supplied from the offshore turbines. They are producing about 80,000 megawatt hours, which is like more than 3 times of the domestic consumption on land. So it just say something about how much energy we use for transportation. These are owned partly by the municipality and by people, private investors and public investors in co-ops. So that's also shared. And then kind of the last kind of maybe major things was we needed to look at energy efficiency. So we kind of found about 20% energy savings in houses in ordinary consumption by exchanging refrigerators and other things here to a more energy consuming or energy efficient technology, which saved a lot of energy production. So that was the project. Next, please. So in this, we talked about how do we talk about change. To talk about change is not so easy. So we talk about language and conversations. Human beings exist in language, conversations, stories, and narratives. Human beings invent their worlds with words, conversations, and actions. So it is only the few already convinced or very nerdy engineers and technicians who understand the concept of technology and the transition seen from a technological point of view. We try to kind of say the community need to understand that we are looking into the future and we're looking into kind of the narrative of Samsø not being just the potato island or the tourist island or the nature place, but it's also like a sustainable energy place. And to talk ourselves into that to be the greenest place in Denmark was part of the narrative and convincing story people could kind of understand and see the potential of. So it was not creating like a not in my backyard or in my backyard convincing, but much more like what's in it for me? What does it mean for me to make this transition? And then make people aware of their role as storytellers about the future. Next. So in this, we need kind of to navigate, and this is a compass, and we have a center we call here. So it's all about Samsø, and here is the place. It is right here. It's not out in the UN and the development goals or in the European concept or something. It's also there, but it's mostly here. So here is the place where you take action. And to take action, you need to understand, who are we, the local community? Who are we in, and how are we going to invite people to kind of participate in this? The new is, what can we do? The change is, what do we want? And the action is, what do we then do, actually? And this is very important that we talk to people about that. And in this, sorry, there's a lot of words here in this also. Some are not just positive. There's some, we call it manipulation and ambition, which is like showing ambition for people is sometimes convincing in a way where people don't really understand what is happening here. So you can say it's a friendly manipulation, but it's also like a sharing of possibilities. And then when the plumber, the farmer, the house owner can see it, then all of a sudden we kind of we share the compass, and then we start thinking about how do we do this in a good way. Next. So this is Samsø seen from a very beautiful place. And next slide again. So we put wind turbines in the landscape. This is very early in the morning, and you can actually see in the distance there's some smoke coming up left of the most right positioned wind turbine. And this is a smokestack from a nearby power station on the mainland. It's about 20 kilometers away from Samsø. And this is a coal-fired power station, or was when we started this 20 years ago. And Samsø is surrounded by coal and gas-fired power stations that was usually in the old days supplying all of Denmark with energy. So we could say we were ventilating the smoke away from Samsø by erecting wind turbines. I mean, abstractly, we, of course, not realistically, but in an abstract way, we could say every time the turbine was spinning, we reduced the emission from the smokestack. And that was something people understood immediately, because it meant something for their eyes and their senses. They could see it, not just understand it seen from kind of very scientific point of view, but see it as a metaphor for change. Next. An experiment doesn't have to be perfect. Experiments can open the way for something radically new. We know we have to do something we haven't tried before when we make changes. In a local community, it's very often kind of restricted by a conservative attitude to, I don't really know. We know what we have. The new here is kind of disturbing my daily life, and therefore I don't like it so much. But on the other hand, we also know we have to dare to do something to make changes. And that is something we need to work on. It's like massage. You have to kind of make it more easy for people to kind of commit to the change, because it's not so easy. We have to understand that changes are necessary for what we need to do for climate and for sustainability in general. We absolutely need to welcome the new. Thank you. Next slide. Power without love is coarse and ruthless. Love without power and sentimental. When we started this in 1998 and 1999 and 2001, it was very much like diverted into kind of the already convinced, the hippies and the climate friends, and on the other side, the business guys and the money and technology focused people. And these two groups were very often in disagreement without even knowing what it meant to be in a disagreement about the real purpose. So my job and my colleagues' job has been to kind of get people to sit around the same table and talk about what they actually shared. Because the visionary hippies and green people activists, they had some ideas that the business guys could see and say, maybe we should invest in wind turbines, maybe we should invest in district heating, and maybe the farmers should start producing biomass to exchange the fuel we already imported from outside. From fossil to green and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, it became kind of the same story seen from two different sides, the front runners and the kind of the hesitating business guys that was necessary to finance what we were doing here. So hand in hand, top down, work with people from both sides. Next. So these are the hippies and the business people. We are here visiting a wind turbine manufacturer, and this is the foundation of the big wind turbine. And it's very interesting when you actually invite people to be co-owning what we call the technical installations and the investments needed here. And these people have been instrumental in this also. Some have invested very, very little money in the project, but they felt that I'm part of it. I use some of my money to buy a share just to indicate that I'm on board, I like the project, and I'm supportive of it. And if you hadn't invited the same people, they would probably have resisted a little bit and said to them, I don't know about this project, it's disturbing the landscape and I maybe not like it so much. So to take part, to be part, and to be invited and feel that you're welcome in the process is so vital for the understanding of why you were doing this. So it's the why before the how. I mean, all the engineers, they want to do things and prove that it's possible. And all the critical, skeptical people, they are kind of asking questions also, why should we do it? Is it really necessary? And how are we going to do it? And these questions are equally important to answer. Next. And the result is that we actually built things we haven't done before. So this offshore wind park is for transportation. This is 10 2.3 megawatt turbines in outside of Samsø, about 3 kilometers off the coast. And we successfully made it in 2 years. We kept the budget as promised. We kept the timeline as promised, and we actually was very successful in this. And we had never tried it before. It was a very complicated process, but it was also like a capacity building, and we learned a lot from the process that we actually start believing we can do more than we thought. We are not a sorry little community. We are actually a very healthy and strong community, and we can together make things work that we didn't believe we could make work before. And this is today up and running, and it's been feeding a lot of profit and a lot of income to the island, so we could do more. Next. And this more is that the profit generated from the process has made the municipality able to exchange all their service cars to electric vehicles. They made a solar canopy, like a garage, where they can charge all the cars. And this is all paid for by the profit from the offshore wind turbines. And this is interesting, that you actually are creating a circular green energy economy that is feeding the next change or the next investment that will help the process. And today the municipality is proudly owners of the most electric cars per capita in any municipality in Denmark. And this interesting thing, it's cheaper today per kilometer driven by a service person in the municipality to use electric cars than it was in the old days when people were driving their own car and they were compensated per kilometer after their work hours. Next, please. The other thing we also kind of got out of it was we started thinking about transportation in a bigger context. So this is our ferry. This is a pretty big ferry. It was built in 2015, 16, and commissioned 6-7 years ago. And it was the first biogas ferry, I think maybe in the world. It's a hybrid ferry sailing on biogas and batteries. But today we have a little problem because we cannot get enough of that gas because of the Russian crisis and stuff like that. But it is still kind of one of the most efficient ferries. It's 180 cars and 600 passengers. So it's a pretty big transport unit, and it's using a lot of energy. And therefore it's important that we also are able to change this. It's owned by the municipality, and therefore it's part of this energy investment portfolio that the municipality is having here. And if we hadn't made the primary investments in wind power, I'm not sure we would have been able to do all these investments afterwards, because now we are in it, and the economy is actually self-supplied or self-sufficient. Next, please. A strong, sustainable, and robust community must share locality, activity, and mentality. Locality is obvious. It's here. Activity is the plan where we are acting up against. And then mentality is maybe the most complicated. Sometimes you hear people say, I don't really get what's happening here. I don't understand what it is, but I feel that is the right thing. So there's something we can call mental ownership or mental feeling of participation, which is that people feel that we're on the right track. Everybody else is happy about it, so I'm also happy. So the mental feeling of commitment is equally important as the physical connection. And I think this is also something we need to work on. The narrative of change has to be kind of a common story about what we do here. And therefore, I feel mentally connected to this because I know the story and I'm also part of it, even if I'm not very active in the process. Next. I mean, this is a little bit artificial. This is me trying to kind of make people aware of their connection. So they hold hands around the local village pond. But this is a very nice picture also saying that we are a community and we are the world for a little while, and we hold hands around the pond, like indicating that we stick together when we really need to do something. So these little images of us doing particular interesting things is also like a narrative. We make a difference. We are important, and therefore we will go further. what we do here. Next. And this is leading to more. So this is an image from 2 years ago in Glasgow at the COP 26, where Samsø received, together with Paris and Guadalajara in Mexico, in the middle you can actually see who is who. And we received an award called the UN Climate Leader Award. And it's very interesting to see I'm there with my mayor, and we are receiving this award together with 2 million citizens, towns or villages, or no, not villages, cities in the world. And Samsø still plays a role here. Of course, I feel a little bit sad that there's not a lot of other communities that could be awarded, and I'm sure there was some, but we were awarded, and we use this proudly to present that what we have done and what we still do is still important. And as a model for the world, we have a responsibility to share the experience, which we also do. I think we have 3,000-4,000 visitors per year at the Energy Academy that comes from all kinds of society levels, like from presidents and prime ministers to local villagers who wants to see how they can actually change their village in Ogata in Japan, or in Moncton in Canada, or in Brisbane in Australia. There's a lot of different reasons for us to be models, and you can choose your own pick here and find your own reason to believe that this is. And we on our side have to live up to that reputation, and thank you to the UN for appreciating that. Next, please. So just to wrap it up for my side, I think that one of the strongest lesson learned for us is that we started with a top-down process. We were announced by the Danish government to be the Danish energy island. And for that, we received kind of a title, Samsø, Denmark's Renewable Energy Island. And we felt very obliged or very kind of honored to have that title, but we also felt a strong responsibility to prove that it was possible to do this. Why was it then internally when we turned it like bottom up? Well, it became important because we needed to change the destiny of the island. We have an aging population. We lacked kids in the school. We needed more new jobs to attract young people to come and live here. And that was kind of the message that was sent out, that had some reflection and meant something for people. All of a sudden, we could see the green transition actually answering or tick these boxes. Yes, it is inviting new people to come and work here. It is inviting science and research to come and develop new ideas, and so on and so forth. It became kind of a growth and nursery for what we exactly needed in this also. So having a master plan and a top-down support from the government, from the EU, and then kind of be able to turn that upside down and make a bottom-up approach and divide it into what's in it for me element is kind of the key to success for us. And this is also why people come and talk to us about this from Japan, from Canada, from the European Union, from different islands and different communities. It's not to see the wind turbines or the district heating, because it's kind of already old technology and known technology. It's much more to understand what brought people to the position where they could make decisions about changes and actually participate actively. So thank you for listening, and it was all for me now, and have a good day.
Okay, so now you met Søren. What was your first thought? For the people in the room, were there some who already knew the Samsø case? Was there someone who already heard about them? Vivian?
Yes, I would like to speak. Yes, it was a good example. I didn't know about it. It is actually very inspiring, very a very, very nice project. It's wow. I'm impressed.
Yeah, and the point is, so if you take, they started in 1997 with that call for the government. So that's about 26 years. Søren was a young guy at that moment. He's not anymore. But so he made what Han already said in Han Bizet in the first training we had. He really made sustainability a business on the island. So he is literally hosting people from governments throughout the world on helping to initiate transition, and it's a continuous evolvement. And he wasn't from the municipality; he just set it up himself, and so he works, of course, closely with the municipality. But you see the change that he makes. There are some drawbacks. when I investigated a case a couple of years ago, and it's something that Søren didn't touch in this presentation, but it's an important aspect. And I think yesterday, Janet, you also nodded your head when I said, okay, you also have to think about the vulnerable consumers when you are allowing more consumers to have PV. Then of course vulnerable consumers are more sensitive to not being able to do that and might end up with paying the costs of the transition at a higher price. So when we were researching the case of Samso, then you saw that he discussed at a certain moment the energy efficiency subsidies that were available for the people to improve their houses and to move to district heating. And so we ended up talking to one of the people that lived in a more, let's say, vulnerable situation. And at the moment the whole project was ongoing, he couldn't invest. He couldn't invest in the windmill. He couldn't invest in his own energy transition of this house. He couldn't invest in, you know, changing to the district heating because it was like largely subsidized, but not completely. And he said there are people who feel excluded. So in that first round of change, when, you know, it was all about the ambition and the engagement and let's say the euphoria of being in that change, there was a lack of attention to vulnerable consumers. Partially also because I think it was largely initiated by his drive. Søren has an amazing drive. But if you're from an authority, of course, you're much more conscious about your more vulnerable consumers. And so what he does more and more is giving back to society as a whole, and taking these more vulnerable consumers more into account. And that is definitely something that we see more and more. There will be an example of that in the later section. Any other remarks or questions? If not, then Camille, I think it's your turn.
Just a remark from
Yeah?
me.
Yeah.
This is Zephyrinus. In terms of I like the idea of taking ownership. Like you said, just seeing the turbine means you can own shares. This is a very nice strategy, I think, to really have people own it, and then if you own it, it means that you're part of the process and not necessarily seeking to slow it down. But my concern would be what sort of an impact did this approach have on the timelines? You know, the time to become an owner. As you said earlier, was it a very successful approach in terms of timing? Did it delay the process in any way?
Well, we're coming back to that concept of ownership as well later, but it does not necessarily delay stuff. Because you reduce, especially with wind turbines, you might end up otherwise with, you know, resistance, which leads to processes and stuff like that. It'll delay, especially the first one. But what you will see typically is when you embrace the concept of these grassroots initiatives, which he is the living example of that, they tend to deliver really well. Like an investor will go for the best place for 6 wind turbines and then probably leave your island. People who live there have more drive to also go maybe for that second best place or even the third best place. And sometimes it's with investors. Sometimes it's a combination of investors and local people. There's a case in France, and I can refer you to that as well. That could be interesting for you. I will put the link in the chat window later on. It was a project, a contract supported by the European Commission for rural energy community advisory hub, so to help rural energy communities. And they identified a number of best practices. And one of them is a wind turbine somewhere on the rural area in France, where a German investor came to the city and told, like, you know, we want to have 6 wind turbines here. And the mayor simply said, you can have 5, and the 6th one is for the people. They can invest in it. And so the benefit there was that, you know, for the German investor, whether they asked permits for 5 or 6 didn't make a difference. But by going with that model, they knew that the acceptance from the owners of the, from the landowners in the region and from the municipality would be much easier. So it was really a win-win. And that has led to them using the money from the wind turbine for the renovation of old buildings. So it's really that, yeah, it also initiated other projects in renewable energy. So it kind of activates your your small businesses. In France, also the unions, les syndicats, they're part of it as well. And that really creates that desire to have the next project. So it might delay the first one, but it'll probably give you more in the end than when you don't do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks for that explanation.
Okay. So Camille, yours, do you want Sarah or me to share the slides, or you're doing it yourself?
If you could, that would be great. So,
okay, Sarah has them already. There you go.
First of all, I just wanted to say a big hello from Scotland to you all. It's amazing to be part of this event because I've been involved with energy issues on my island, which is a very small island on the west coast of Scotland, and at European level with all my colleagues of the Small European Islands Federation. So, because I live on a non-connected island, and you all live on non-connected islands, I thought I would use the example of the 3 islands in Brittany that are not connected. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
There you go. So I've put the picture of the Brittany coast for you, where all the 15 islands of the Île du Ponant Association are situated. And you can see at the very top of Finistère, you have the 3 islands of Ouessant, Molène, and Saint, who are non-connected. And as such, they depend on fossil fuel for most of their needs. They produce also 13 times more CO2 than similar size mainland communes. They have respectively 60, 120, and 700 permanent inhabitants, but in the summertime, they have several thousand visitors coming to see them, and that is a big issue for the whole managing of the energy on the islands. So you can see from summer, they pass from winter, they go from 60 kilowatt to 550 kilowatt in the case of Molène, 300 to 2,200 in summer for Ouessant. So basically, this is why they are at the heart of the energy transition carried out by the Association of the Île du Ponant. They have benefited immensely from an institutional framework, the national one, the Positive Energy Territory for Green Growth, and the regional one, which is a lighthouse project, Énergénèse, the Iroise Sea Energy Loop. Énergénèse being a Breton word. Important because the whole thing is about mobilizing Brittany and Bretons to get into the energy transition. So what does it consist of in practical terms? PVs on all the municipal buildings, including all the former the power stations, solar hot water for all the municipal campsites, and also the great lighthouse part, the tidal stream turbine, the Sabella D10, with a potential production of 1 megawatt. And of course, there's a smart system to integrate all this. Next slide, please. So, of course, the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one that you don't consume. So at the base of the energy strategy for this transition was trying to get everybody to consume less. So 3 islands at the west coast, on the west coast of Brittany, going to the islands with an old sailboat to pick up all the fridge freezers and replace them with good quality appliances that were energy savings was a really good way of getting the population behind you. Also, the distribution of LED light bulbs for the homes and for the public lighting. That was a big game changer too, to get people interested. And of course, in all the mairie, you have public buildings, including the old folks' home. So you need to do insulation, change windows, improve doors, and smart programming of heating systems and appliances. And then finally, the last one, which was the big difference, the big game changer in the whole support of the local population, was the renovation of private homes. 150 houses in the first 5-year plan, and 200 the next 5 years. And now there's going to be another five-year plan. Also, let's not forget the distribution of heritage hen kits and the hen houses that came with a boat that you can see on the slide. That was to minimize the CO2 emissions associated with domestic waste. Next slide, please. So, because the mayors were strongly involved in the whole of the project, they have to deal with the infrastructure to do with visitors. They have to look at all these complex projects. And basically, having pilot projects has been a great way to get the population also involved in the project. So from the Sabella tidal stream turbine pilot, there's been this amazing amount of spare electricity that has been produced. Not only it has the potential to produce half the needs of the islands, but also it does produce excess energy for experimentation with hydrogen in transport. And it's been a great opportunity to team up with a young Breton startup to produce hydrogen motorbike and give all the island population a chance to try them out. And also getting them to sort of imagine far more easily how the end of thermal motorbikes and vehicles on the island could actually happen as soon as 2030. The other important thing that was included in the transport aspect of the whole project was the off-peak hours. Off-peak hours are really important in a system when you have tidal energy, because it's all depending on the tides. So if you have electric vehicles, that people want to have electric vehicles, you do need to sort of link up the sources of energy with the time of peak hours and off-peak hours. And with 40 participants from July to October 2022, there was the creation of a flexible off-peak app, which has been absolutely brilliant for people that want to use their electric vehicle on the island. The other aspect of it all is the information campaign that has been part of associating the businesses to do with accommodation, the hotels, anything to do with accommodation. This has been a way to bring them to educate their clients, their customers. Because of course, if you arrive in Brittany, the weather is not always good. So what do you do? First thing you do, you put your heating on. So there's a whole sort of like kit of marketing tools of like awareness raising for visitors that has been distributed to the accommodation providers to educate their visitors. And it's so successful that it's actually in demand since they were created. The other thing also is that there's a national campaign, or rather a regional campaign, in the ferries and in the ferry terminals to encourage people to do the new eco-geste that the region is really wanting to see happening. Next slide, please. We should have called that one financing and stakeholders, but there you go. So you were talking about institutional framework earlier on, and that was such an interesting discussion, by the way. It was brilliant to hear all the discussion in the Miro board. So there's been this massive amount of money leveraged by the Territoire à énergie positive pour la croissance verte, positive energy for green growth, financed by the Ministry of Environment, Energy and the Sea, and the 2 programs for renovation of the habitat, and also the infrastructure, energy infrastructure of Ouessant, which I forgot to mention here. You have the Association des Îles du Ponant and their own local consultant, which is, or rather energy officer, which is so much more, such a better way to integrate with the local population than a consultant from the mainland. Somebody that knows the island, that has been to the island, that has a trust of the island, and can then do all the work of getting all the dossier to be followed up until it's all done. When you have municipalities like Ouessant, Molène et Saint, you're talking about one mayor and very little backup. So it's a big job to be able to do everything else in the town hall, in the mairie, and also dealing with energy. That can create problems. Energy consultants. Well, in this project, you had Aqua Energy, which was based in Paris. They approached the islands to do Projet Énergenèse. And you have Sabella, Breton company based on mainland Brittany, who is experimenting with a tidal stream. And you have also the local energy union, which is acting as an energy agency for the communes and is also financed by them. So you see, the proximity is completely different when you're talking about the energy consultant, and that creates its own dynamics. And then on top of that, you have EDF SEI. SEI stands for Système Énergétique Isolé. That's for the islands. And guess what? They are financed by a national solidarity tax. So they have, in effect, in their self-interest, to support research, support innovation, because they pay less money for fossil fuel. They have to produce electricity. If they can produce it with renewable, it's all gain for them. It's really important for them that it happens. So you can see that they've financed quite a lot of the actions in this project. And finally, you have the Région Bretagne, which is a good science team, and they are the sort of like flagship of energy transition in France. So they are doing really well at the moment. Can you, next slide, please? So I'll finish with this one, a key point for success. So on the surface, it looks absolutely wonderful. You've got the sort of PV panels on the Ile de Saint, on the former EDF electricity power plant. And it seems that the islanders have managed to change their daily consumption to become prosumers instead of consumers. So all to do with a lot of, rather with the technology, getting people some benefits, some freebies, awareness campaigns, creating the motivation for this voluntary change in behavior, create new eco habits, and ownership, of course, of the project by the local people. Somehow in the literature that I found on the website of AIP, this came not so much to the top. And it's a shame, because I think that's exactly what SAMSUR has demonstrated, the importance of the whole project to be owned by local people. And that's where my second key point will be the communication. Communication actually has been so bad that in some aspect of the project that to do with the whole of the Énergenèse project in Ouessant, that it has ground to a halt at the moment. Basically, the consultant did not take into account the local realities and the resistance to wind power, particularly in the context of a national debate on the issue. They haven't also not taken into account the huge summer population that comes to the island and that are very resistant to the idea of wind power as changing the landscape. And because the communication hadn't been done properly, the whole problem occurred that the island became divided again, as those people that supported the mayor and those that did not support him, and very personal things came into the fore to polarize the population of the island, with as a result that there is no wind power project at the moment. Sabela is having difficulties, and Akwe Energy has pulled out of the project because it was predicated on having at least one wind turbine. So I think that's a perfect illustration of an energy transition that starts very well, but is very easily derailed because quite a lot of the safeguards had not been really done for this project. And one of them, the most important, I think, was the stakeholder consultation. So that's the end of my wee story.
Thank you, Camille. Really interesting. Also, the fact that you shared transparently what didn't go well, because we often forget it. By the way, it could be, Jean-Baptiste, if you're there, it could be an idea. We once had, Sarah was there as well, a fuck-up night, and that sounds odd, but it was to, after a couple of beers, sit in a dark room and have someone really explaining what went wrong, because there's so much you can learn from what you say here, Camilla. You initiated and then it dropped out. Like, why did it drop out? Because that is where you can learn, if you copy it, that you have to do a difference. So I really appreciated that. With regards to the off-peak app, was it part of a research project?
Yes, it was very much part of the EDF SEI project. I mean, that you can look it up online.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting. And I think for those of you that are living in places where lots of solar PVs will be in operation, I don't suppose you have too much of a problem when it drops and fluctuates. But it's a way of getting people on your side. And one of the things that the French government has done is done a certification. So if you are a company that uses this smart application for measuring the optimal charging point, you will have a certificate of, like, you know, a low carbon company or something like this. So I forgot.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah. I think we encountered the same at Samsung when Søren was telling me that in the beginning, when they switched to renewables, and the boats were more and more electrified, they have this small harbor in their main capital. I mean, main capital has 50 houses, but anyhow. And so all the boats came back at around the same time and all plugged in, and then the switch, of course, broke. So they had to introduce some kind of smart flexibility system as well in order to just be able to handle the transition without having to reinforce the grid. So I think that's a very interesting example. Now, instead of me talking, I'm going to ask the audience whether there's some questions for Camille. Go ahead, Tess. She's super transparent. You can learn a lot from her.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I'm Andrea from you talked about some of the projects being funded by Ministry of Energy. The question is more broad. Was this transition, do you feel like it was more government-led, initialized and led throughout the process, or was it more something that happened and flew out of, like, private initiatives and stuff? Because you have different roles that government can play. You can, as a government, of course, give out subsidies and make it easier for and to encourage private enterprises to head in this direction, or you can try to do it yourself. And so I'm trying to gauge with your study and what has happened, like, how do you guys what you guys did in that regard when it comes to that those two players of private and public relation?
Well, that's a very good question, because I mean, the islands, or rather the AIP and the mayors were able to sort of like look at the trends and sort of like say, right, there's a trend there, we can, the territoire énergie positive for green growth, that was a kind of example of, you could tap into that project to make a package of measure that you are going to do. And they did a lot of the solar on municipal buildings, and solar heaters for campings were from that program. And then you had the sort of programs that EDF was sort of like motivated to do, because if they reduce the consumption of energy in houses, they will have less draw on the resources. Therefore, it's easier to introduce renewable, a larger proportion of renewable in the system. And so it's a vested interest that they have to reduce consumption and try innovative things. But
so it's not only government, I mean, it was also a bit of push by EDF itself.
Well, and also, no, it's a kind of like, it's a relationship between EDF and the mayors. It's like it's a win-win for them. It's expensive, it's and dirty to bring fuel to the island. And also there's the whole context of the French policy of decarbonization. Brittany, the island's flagship, that's what it says. So they started, the project of the Sabella, which lasted, 5 years, it's almost operational now. It's actually operational now, but the company is in difficulty, and is the government going to rescue that company? Why was there not an idea that the islanders themselves could be stakeholders in that wind turbine? Because they themselves would have identified that there was a site already on the island that had been used for a wind turbine, which was no longer operational. And they would have not reacted to the same way as having a wind turbine at the entrance of the island, which had such an impact for, because it's iconographic, it's iconic rather, sort of like it's Brittany. And then you have all these millions of second home of visitors, well, thousands of visitors, and the second home owners who have a huge pressure on the island for resisting some kind of change.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you see that in many of these projects, the role of the government can be multiple ways, but you do see, and we'll come back to these data also, that a supporting government really enables to have a faster adoption, even if the money doesn't come from them. So EDF, of course, is a bit an atypical one, because I think until when was it still state-owned? I mean, it's still owned by the French government, no?
Yes, but what's interesting is that actually EDF SEI in English, is a branch of EDF which is financed by what is called a collaboration, what is it called in French? It's a national tax, solidarity tax. So all people in France are actually paying for the operation of EDF, because they also work in the overseas territory of France.
Yeah. Okay.
Your colleagues in France will know about that, because they would benefit from this.
Yeah. Any other questions? Stephen, Avril, Ramon, Eric, my favorite, Robert, anyone? If not, then I am going to take you to a number of examples. And so I need to go to the right screen, download the presentation. Voila, open it, and then I'm going to share it with you. There we go. So I'm going to take you through a bit the history of such stakeholder engagement as bottom-up initiatives. And I mean, again, if you need to know more, like was already asked, I think, by one in the chat window, don't hesitate. There's a lot of literature on the topic. There's also a lot of biased literature on the topic, so that we have to be honest about it as well. We're going to talk about the stakeholders and bottom-up initiatives. What Søren has done, and what Camille hints to, that you need to engage local people, is not something new. So I want to show you a bit where it actually, that it has a history, and how dependent the waves are of such initiatives. And then we're going to see a bit how it's currently pushed by the European Commission. So that's why there's a lot of experiences that you can learn from. And the link in the chat window is to a few of these best practices, which are part of that Rural Energy Community Advisory Hub. I'm going to take you to a few inspiring cases, and then I'm going to show you again the numbers that I think I showed yesterday or the day before already briefly, to show really the potential of when you enable a framework for such bottom-up initiatives. And it's not always easy to do that, especially when, I think Janet's case, when everything is still state-owned. You also have to be careful, because you might introduce something that is called a Matthew effect. And I will come back. I'm just going to make sure that I touch it briefly also, that Matthew effect in the presentation. I don't mind if you interrupt me, so don't hesitate. I can't see the chat window, so you just have to interrupt me like that. So this is a chart that shows a typical type of bottom-up initiatives under a form of cooperatives. So that means you jointly own the asset, and it actually typically is with one member has one vote. So whether it's a company that owns part of the asset, or whether it's a small household, and whether the company invested 25,000 and the household or only 250, for example, they would both have one vote. So that's a bit the idea behind it. It's not always the case, so it's a bit broad, but that's a typical case. So what you see in the slide is the waves, the number of cooperative as function of the years. And it starts at 1980. Now, there have been energy community concepts way before that, even in the early 1900s. And a typical case of that was when in Germany, the electrification started. And so private investors were really interested to go to cities, but they weren't interested to go to rural areas because the cost would be too high, as the number of connections per kilometer of line would be too low. And so this is when you had these Stadtwerken in Germany, so these bottom-up initiatives where the municipality and some local actors would jointly say, well, you know, if they don't want to, we'll do it ourselves. So it is as old as that. And I'll bring another few examples so that you can feel like it's not something new. And it's often in different concepts, but it often includes the municipality. And we do see that when a municipality is included, or a local authority, that the potential of such an initiative to really grow and become more substantial is higher. So what you see in here, the big bump that starts in the early 80s and goes down again in 2010, is when the Danish government said, we actually would like to see onshore wind turbines. But the technology wasn't ready yet. So a lot of Danish companies were investing in research and development. And then you could do a few things as a government. You could say either I give subsidies for the further development, but they took another approach. And so the Danish government said, you know what, we're going to create you a market, because if there is a market, we have a better guarantee that the subsidies we give are going to lead to jobs and economy. And by creating that market, we create acceptance. And that helps us to also achieve a greener economy. So it helps us in multiple aspects. The greener economy wasn't yet so much important in the early 80s, but Denmark is definitely a front runner on it. So what the government did was they encouraged small groups of people, typically between 5 and 20 people, that would jointly invest in the wind turbine, and they would get guarantees. So they would get a guaranteed price for the injection, and some other guarantees, so that they were actually sure that they would get their investment back with a decent financial return. Doing that, it created a massive amount, as you can see, of small communities, small cooperatives that jointly invested in the wind turbine. And it's not fully symmetrical, but it is almost symmetrical. So what you see is that the wind turbines that started to be built in the 80s, typically after 20 years, they were done. I mean, it's the first technology, they were end of life. So you see the number of cooperatives going down again. It's perfectly fine, because what happened is that then the technology would mature. There was no need for subsidizing guarantees anymore. So it was typically taken over by either bigger energy cooperatives or by private investors. But it really helped to enable the technology to grow and to create acceptance and to make people use of having wind turbines in the area. You see, this is far before Søren started with his Energy Academy project on Samsø, and it was really successful. You see another wave around 2008 being initiated in Germany. It'll go down afterwards again, but this is when there were favorable feed-in tariffs combined with the financial crisis. And the financial crisis was where people said, you know, we don't trust the big corporates anymore. We'll take matters in our own hands. So this is when you didn't only see cooperatives or citizen-led initiatives or small-scale initiatives to be initiated in energy, but for example, also in food and in health. And these food cooperatives still exist in some member states. For example, you have the Co-op if you go to Switzerland. I think also in France, Camille, I think there's still cooperative supermarkets. I'm not sure about it though. And you had, for example, also in the UK, you had these cooperative supermarkets. So it's a phenomenon that you see that is typically dependent on, you know, the oil crisis or a financial crisis, where people just say, okay, let's just do it ourselves. Then at least we are fine, and then at least, you know, it's going to happen. So that is to just show that they're not new. They're typically not necessarily something that lasts very long. It can really depend on local situations, but they do show to be able to deliver a substantial contribution. So what the Commission did is a few things. There is a bit of a background on this. So Europe is, compared to many of you, Europe doesn't have so much solar energy, only in the south and nothing in the north. And I mean, geopolitically, we're very close to Russia, which is now more a threat than ever. So it's important that we become less and less dependent. We don't have a lot of natural resources. So the Commission defined the clean energy package with one of the ideas is let's be less energy dependent. Let's also be an example in the clean energy transition. Linked to that is when you take an exemplary role, you attract industry, you attract R&D, and so that creates jobs, but it also creates a certain socioeconomic position in the world. So there's a lot behind it. However, the clean energy package did include a lot of things that weren't going to be adapted easily or adopted easily. So what the Commission did was they called it not the clean energy package with a lot of measures, they called it power to the people. And as you know, people in policy are elected, they couldn't say we don't want this. They couldn't say to their voters, we don't want you to have power. So that was a way of getting it adopted more easily. And one of the things that was introduced was a more active role for bottom-up initiatives for small companies. There's a lot of small companies on the islands, but also on most of the continents. So it was really important to give them a role, while reducing a bit the role of the bigger corporates, which you don't have so much, but here you have really super big corporates like EDF, Iberdrola, that were holding back the energy transition substantially, especially in Spain. And so they made a legislative and regulatory push to enable a more active role of consumers in the energy market. And one of the concepts they introduced to do that is renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities. There are other means as well, rights for every consumer to be a prosumer, to be able to produce himself. There's another fancy word that I'm going to put on the table. You might remember it afterwards. A prostarmer, that is someone who not only produces, but also stores energy. So these were initiated, and what they actually are is a renewable energy community is actually a group of people where you join in voluntary, you can hence step out voluntary, and you are either an SME, a local authority, an association like a union, or a natural person, and hence municipalities are also allowed to join. And they jointly, as a group, have a legal entity that owns assets. Assets can be cars for sharing electric vehicles with fancy chargers on PV, these kind of things. It can be PV, wind, hydro, biomass, as long as it's renewable. And the idea was that it's not so much the profit of it, the dividend of it, or the profit of it, but it's mainly meant to have that environmental, economic, and social community benefits. So what I mentioned earlier, all that village that had the 6 wind turbines, one was then owned by the villagers, and they used the money to renovate a monument in the village. That is actually what they mean. We'll go through a few other examples of that as well. The difference with citizen energy communities is in citizen energy communities, the proximity to the renewable energy project is not so important. And also the ownership doesn't need to be of the community. They might just have the right to use the assets. So it could be people that have a wind turbine or a hydro plant that join and then that's brought in. Large entities are allowed to participate in it, but they're not allowed to vote in it. So they can't have an overwhelming vote, because then, of course, it's not anymore the community that would own the project. They may engage in other aspects from renewable energy, but they could also have other energy. And some of them are allowed, in some member states, it's allowed that they take over the distribution grid. A funny story to that distribution grid, as you all know where Finland is located, we're talking 2016, 2018, when this legislation was prepared. And at a certain moment, I'm at the commission, and we are having this discussion on this distribution grid ownership or not. And so they bring to the table the particular case of the capital of Finland, Helsinki, which has about 2,000 people per square kilometer. And so there is a party that wants to take over the distribution grid in Helsinki, which of course is beneficial because there's so many users per square kilometer. But if you start allowing that, that would imply that, you know, the distribution grid up north in the north of Finland, in Lapland, would be of no interest to anyone, because you have 2 people per square kilometer that don't live there all the time. Some of them do, but let's say on average, you have 1 person per square kilometer. So that would imply, and that brings me to Janet nodding yesterday, if you would allow the interesting part to be taken out of the operation of the distribution grid, that implies that all the other costs, which are now socialized, would be on the other consumers. And hence, living in Lapland, using electricity there would make it insanely expensive to do that. And that, as a consequence, it was before the war that we currently have, as a consequence, people would be leaving Lapland, because it's not the most, you know, the big businessmen that live there. It's, you know, farmers who are often in poverty living there. So they couldn't pay for it anymore. And hence they would have to move towards the capital. That would imply that most of the year, most of the winter, Lapland would be empty, and it would be an open invite for Russians to come and invade that part of Finland. And that sounded an odd discussion when we were having it so many years ago. But when the war in Ukraine started, it was like, yes, we made the right decision to not allow that. So it's sometimes as complicated as that, to allow certain aspects to be open or not. So I follow Janet in saying, yeah, we need to be protective, just to also ensure that we protect our most vulnerable consumers. I can tell a lot of stories about this topic because I've been diving into it like hell, but it all has a history of why things are in there or not. So I'm going to take you to some inspiring cases. again, you interrupt me when you feel pleased, when you want to know something more. The first I'm going to take you is in Ghent in Belgium, and that links a bit to the topics that have been coming up already a couple of times. So in the French session, the first night, we had a presentation on a new scheme for energy efficiency, and that links actually a bit to what Camille said. When you match your demand and your supply, that is actually beneficial for the grid. But when you would be matching a reduced, let's say, a demand for an increased supply with a reduced demand, you actually lead to the same effect. So what they're testing now in the US and in some other countries is that they're checking the aggregation of increased efficiency as a potential bid on the market together with production. So that, you avoid certain consumption and hence you don't need that extra production. And so what Energent does as an energy community is they brought together a lot of people. In the beginning, it were like 20, 15 people. But now they have like 1,200, we'll come to the numbers later, and they do two specific activities. One is, as soon as there is a roof of a consumer that has more than 50,000 kilowatt hours, they are happy to arrange everything with regards to the PV setup. And that is often interesting for, let's say, hotels, municipal buildings, schools, businesses that are focused on something else and don't have that expertise. And what you said earlier, I think, it was the fact that Gilbert, would it delay? Well, it actually takes away the burden as well, because if you ask a business that is, let's say, focused on giving courses for divers, and it's a big business, they don't have time to do it, so they wouldn't put the PV installation otherwise. So these people often do, and it's often voluntary, but they're very engaged. They would take over the whole project for you. They would be following up, they would be contacting someone in case something is wrong. So that is a substantial part of what they do. The other part that they do is they train volunteers, and they now have staff on it as well. They have 11 engineers on it, where they help people, whether it's a small business, it's a municipal building, or again, it's a private building. They help with an energy audit and with how do you now start your renovation. You could say on the island it's maybe less important. Well, all these Airbnb buildings where there's air conditioning, if they're not well designed, you're really losing a lot of power. And what was said by Camille earlier, tourists come in, they do expect a certain level of comfort. They're not used to sleep in the heat with just a fan on. So educating them, training them, but also making these houses more efficient would be a super important thing to realize that energy transition. So you see here, and I love the picture, for several reasons. I'll explain soon. 2,102 members, that's where they are today. They did 8,200 almost renovation advices, of which you would say on average like 1/4 really leads to renovation steps. So that is a substantial amount, especially because renovation uptake is very low in our country. And they've installed about 50 megawatt peak, all with money from citizens. So there's no governmental money involved. But the reason why I wanted to show the picture, and actually you see a bit of the lady I don't know whether you see my arrow, but the lady here, on the left, looks at what the other vote. And you see also the guy here, that is above the guy with the red jacket, is looking at what the others vote. So it is set to increase energy democracy, but you see here also social pressure. And that is something you have to be aware of. So we earlier said the potential impact of people living in Lapland. That is something you have to take into account, but also you need to look at real ways where people could express their own vote without feeling social pressure. If someone would not be raising their hand here, there would probably be a discussion afterwards, like, why didn't you vote for it? So there's definitely room for improvement. However, I mean, they do realize a lot of change, and they have a diversity of people, and they're really targeting also vulnerable consumers, not with the actions that they currently have, but with some of the profit is redirected to energy poor consumers, which brings me to the Matthew effect. And so the point is, citizens co-invest, and the typical investment is about, the share is at least 250 euro. For people living in poverty, 250 euro is not something they can miss. Also because, the dividend comes as 3-5% next year and then the year afterwards, so they couldn't miss that. And so what you typically see is that when these initiatives as energy communities would be investing on the PV of a municipal building, expecting a dividend of between 3 and 6% annually, you exclude the participation of the people who can't pay for it. But if the municipality would have put the installation in the market, they might have paid less, because a dividend of 3 to 5% half a year ago, when the interest rate was still much lower, was a high price for an installation that you would get cheaper on the market. So if you can get it cheaper on the market, that actually means that you are using some municipal money to direct to a profit of people that can pay a share. And that is when you have an effect on the people that can't pay for it. It's like you make the poor people even more poor, and you make the rich people even more rich. And that was the comment that the Søren also got in this first phase for the wind turbines, when the wind turbine was co-owned by people who could invest in it. And then he started realizing, I need to give back to the community. So he handled it really well, but it's a risk that we see with this kind of projects. To come back to this afterwards, but this is where you see the European Commission is helping such initiatives to grow in their role to contribute to the policy goals of the Commission and of the member states. So renovation is a key thing that we need to do in Europe. And so we are currently leading the contract for something is called citizen-led renovation. So that's really that bottom-up trust building around each other, helping them to renovate. And so Energent is one of the pilots, but we also have a pilot in Bulgaria where it's much more challenging. One in Ireland and one in Portugal. And I mean, there it's really with the intention that these citizen-led initiatives would really engage others and take them along to jointly start the renovation. This one, Coöperatie Goed, for the ones who speak Dutch, you understand what it is an amazing example. Goed, in English, it's the same thing, so it's a good cooperative. It's an initiative that was initiated by the municipality of Groningen in the north of the Netherlands. And they asked a lady called Musetta Blauw to develop a project that would really lead to social cohesion. And the concept that she typically does is that she, someone comes with a roof and says, I'm fine with you developing a project on the roof of this farm. And then she doesn't ask any membership fee. She just asks you to become member without any payment. And then she develops the project with the lowest potential financing cost and the highest potential yield. And the profit of the project is going to a community project that all the members around the project jointly decide. It could be a football club that says, well, we can't reduce the entrance fee or the membership fee, but it would be really good if we can have a number of football players joining from the vulnerable consumers if such a renewable energy project would give us an income to compensate for their membership fee. That is one of the projects she did. Another project is for Energiebank, and Energiebank is an energy bank. So it's the idea is that they collect money and they help people that have issues with paying their energy bill. And as a consequence, they face comfort issues. So it's a completely different setup than Energent, where you pay to become member. Here you don't pay anything. So you just join because you do it out of social benefit. On the picture on the left, the woman you see there is Musetta. And so these are just some of the projects they do. So sometimes it's on a museum. It could be, somewhere really the Zonneweide. So it's a big park that they're going to develop. Sometimes it's a commercial building. Sometimes it's a farmer. So they really try to develop these projects with the environment, with the local community, or with the employees of a company. And then they're really trying to give back to the community. So she doesn't earn a lot of it, but she does have a guarantee. And this is where it comes back to that enabling framework of you as authorities. What the Dutch government did is they set up a guarantee fund. So if the price on the market for the injected energy would be too low, the government would pay a guarantee that would bridge the price between what is on the market and the price that you need in order to make it profitable, or let's say to make it break even. So far, they haven't used a lot of the 150 million because the market price is higher than what it's needed to become break even. But again, it gives that trust for citizens that it's okay to, I mean, there's no risk to lose my money, my savings, my pension. I can do this, I can contribute. And that is actually what they did with this fund. A last example is Our Power in Austria. And Our Power is a rural community somewhere in, in the mountains in Austria. They work with hydropower, biomass, solar and wind. And it's really a bottom-up initiative. A couple of years ago, it was like 5-6 people. And now it is to the stage that it provides services to other emerging communities in Austria. Now, important here is that energy communities up to last year could receive 25,000 euro to kickstart and grow. Today, it's reduced to 15,000 because they see the 25 is actually not needed. And the only thing they had to do was match 5 of the bullets that are shown here. So if they would combine PV and wind, or combine a small hydro and PV, or they would do heat and electricity, or they would use batteries, you see it's not that difficult to do something. The community building that Søren and Camilla also, was it Camilla? I'm just bad with names. The speaker before me mentioned, so that community building aspect is super important, but hitting 5 of these boxes wasn't very difficult. And that is what you see in the numbers. So if you look on this graph, it gives you the different types of energy communities. So the dark green is the local energy community. So that is really like you're in the proximity of the activity on the renewable energy. And then the light greens, no, it's the other way around. So the darker greens are the regional ones, the light greens are the local ones. And then you had the Burgerinitiatieve, so the citizen, which are blue. That is where you can engage larger municipalities. But you see that they started to support, I think, mid-2022. So you saw already the uptake of the initiatives. And now, you see really the impact of supporting these communities with templates for contracts, with templates for setting up the community, but also with that financial support. And you see that they're really taking a substantial part in that energy transition in Austria. So that support, and it's typically a municipality, a number of citizens, a local village with some SMEs and things like that, that start developing these initiatives. So to finish, there are different ways that you can enable this, and you can make them taking part of realizing your goals. And that is, of course, developing clear and transparent and good rules. We had yesterday a couple of times where it was mentioned on the Miro board that it takes a lot of time to get the permitting for a renewable energy installation. Well, enabling that, making that transparent, preparing templates for it, being clear about the procedure, and reducing bureaucracy, and that is definitely something you could do. Financial support typically helps them as well, and it doesn't need to be a lot. And we have got the feedback that even the 15,000 that is given currently in Austria, where labor cost is rather expensive. So if you hire a lawyer, I don't think they start under 200 euro an hour. So that financial support is a good thing, and even just a minor amount really helps them to go. And often the system that they did in the Netherlands with that guarantee is a good alternative. And then the technical support, it's called technical assistance, but it's legal. Yeah? It's okay. It's legal, it's administrative, whatever. That really helps. And so what I already showed yesterday is if you take the difference between the initiatives that haven't been supported and the ones that are supported, you see that they grow much faster. You see 5,500 members here and only 166 there. So you see more people be engaged. Yeah, go ahead. I can't hear you. We'll come back to that later. It's the last slide. And then from 100 kilowatt if it's non-supported to 2,500 kilowatt peak if it is supported. So you see that impact, and that is the power you as authorities have. I hear a lot of things, so I'm going to stop sharing because it's the end of the presentation. And I see we have one question in the chat window, which I have to check. If there are any questions or any remarks, let me know. I'm just going to... coöperatieve energieopwekking. Yeah, that's indeed it. Please send me also subsidieregeling. Yeah, Stephen, I will send it to you. It's going to be in Dutch, but I can send you the two schemes. The one for the Netherlands and the one for Austria. Okay, any questions? One new message here. Let's see. Thank you very much. You're welcome, Stephen. Just type your email address in the chat window so I can mail you. Right, I think though Sarah has it probably as well. Yeah, Sarah has it. Thank you, Stephen. I will send it. Any other questions, remarks, thoughts, requests to send more information, these kind of things, just let me know. Or to Camille, or to Søren, because we can send it to Søren as a... Ramon has a question. Ramon, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Peters. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Besides the information you're going to send to Stephen, is it possible that we can get the proposal made by the cooperative Goed?
Yeah, I can. I did an interview with her and I need to write down the case study. So I will do that. But if you're really interested in that case, we might also engage her. Maybe Aurelia is here. Yeah, Aurelia. If we could have her presenting during the workshop, but not bringing her there, but maybe presenting. She's a super inspiring lady in the way she handles things. But I'll send you. Yeah, probably.
That will be wonderful.
Yeah.
That will be wonderful, but I'm just interested in his project document that is submitted for the subsidy.
Yeah. Okay. The documents for the energie. Yeah, I don't know how they call it. Coöperatieve energiegarantie or something. I will get them to you. If needed, I'll translate them. You're from Curaçao, so I don't need to translate them, by the way. If not, I could translate them for you in English. Yeah, I'll get them there as well. You can download it from the website. So I will give you the link to the website. And I did have some connections with the Rijksoverheid Nederland that is in charge of this fund as well. So I can give you the contacts for that one as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay. I suggest, Sarah, before you send the quality survey, that I prepare a few things that we can send with the email that links to some of the information we provided. Camille.
Oh, yeah. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to say thank you again for this amazing opportunity to discover all your issues, all the challenges, and all the opportunities that you have. Just wanted to flag up that in Scotland, where I live, we have the Carbon Neutral Island project, and there is very soon a website that you could go to see how we progress in our challenges with transport, with land use, with fuel poverty on the Scottish Islands. And also, if you want to have a look at the story of my own island, which is the Isle of Egg, which has started a 3 renewable energy system mini grid that, because we didn't have electricity before, we only depended on generators. It's been an amazing story, and we are going from strength to strength because it's a community-owned project, which is set up with the electric company being a subsidiary company of the organism that owns the island, that I'm a director of. And also it provides really good part-time job to a number of our young people.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, that's another thing that we see. Yeah. So Camille, if you have a link, then send it to Sarah and then we'll include it to the email. If it comes tomorrow, it'll be included in a separate email to them. Guys, I really enjoyed it today. It was super interesting, and I like the interactive aspect when you ask questions and stuff like that. So really, thanks a lot, and we'll see you again next week. But if you want to join the French session, you can also come back in an hour for your French. So thanks a lot. We'll be preparing the necessary material. If we forgot anything, you just get back to us, and then we'll get back to you again. Looking forward to see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you, Eric.
Bye.
You're our biggest fan, I think.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.